Welcome back. We are going to talk about social class and crime. So, starting with street crime, it's readily defined as crime from poor and working class activities. So, if you consider things like carjacking and sticking up a liquor store, that would be considered street crime. Where people from poor neighborhoods and people from just let me double check this. I wanted to make sure. Okay. I started recording and I wasn't sure that I started recording. So where people from poor neighborhoods are just as socialized as people from wealthier socioeconomic statuses to want to have things, to want to be able to buy a nice car and live in a nice home, we do pretty good at socializing everyone into these cultural ideas of success. But for people of lower socioeconomic status, most of the time, the legitimate opportunity structures are, for the most part, closed. So when we talk about opportunity structures, we're talking about access to education, access to good jobs, access to ways to create an income within the legitimate means society subscribes. And this type of strain, right, going back to strain theory, is what, from this functionalist perspective, would cause street crime. White-collar crime, on the other hand, is slightly different because white-collar crime would seemingly uses legitimate opportunity structures, and it's more crime of the upper class, of people with higher socioeconomic status, or SES. And it refers to crimes that respectable people of a higher social status are more likely to commit. And usually it's within their occupations. And so examples of this would be things like profiteering or evading income, bribing public officials, embezzling. All these are white-collar crimes. If you're doing it specifically to profit your corporation, this is called a corporate crime. And the book talks about a couple of examples: Sears, Bloomingdale's, Macy's, those kinds of companies who are actively engaged in corporate crime on a regular basis. As a matter of fact, Citigroup is well known for committing crimes against the public, and to such an extent that they keep getting caught over and over again. Most of the time, actually all of the time, when you have corporate crime, there's a penalty, there's a fee, they have to pay money. But nobody really goes to jail, even when when their crime results in death. And so you talk about, say, for example, when workers were hired to blast through a tunnel in Virginia, in West Virginia, and the company knew that the type of dust that the miners were going to be blasting through was going to result in their death. And as hundreds of people, over 600 people died, the company itself, not one person went to jail. They knew beforehand that their deaths would result, and it doesn't matter. The way that we punish corporate crime and white collar crime is very different than the way we punish street crime. You are more likely to receive a much harsher sentence for stealing someone's car than for $1 million embezzlement. You are likely to not even go to jail for embezzling millions of dollars, but you will go to jail for carjacking and can receive a sentence of 20 plus years for such. And it's not that corporate crime is always a financial crime, and sometimes it does result in loss of life and loss of life or injury to other people. So why is corporate crime and white-collar crime treated so differently? If you look at it from a Marxist perspective or a conflict perspective, Class, crime, and the criminal justice system are linked in such a way that the criminal justice system is used in order to maintain the status quo. So you want to keep the already oppressed classes, the poor and the working class and the middle class, in their social location. So when you have a working class person who commits a crime that deals with trying to achieve a higher socioeconomic status, they must be punished more harshly than somebody who's committing a corporate crime, because the person who's committing a corporate crime is who the criminal justice system is supposed to protect. And they're protecting the capitalists against the working class and against the marginal classes. So it's more important to maintain that class structure, and we do it with the criminal justice system by imposing harsher sentences for those who are in poor and poor classes, working class classes, and middle class status, and imposing little to no criminal justice against those who come from high socioeconomic status. In this way, the law acts as an instrument of oppression. It's just another tool for maintaining the status quo, keeping the elites at a high social status and maintaining the mass of the population at a low socioeconomic status. And we see results, we see examples of this in the death penalty biases. So if we look at the statistics, we know that people who come from minority racial groups are much more likely to receive the death penalty. People who are poor are much more likely to receive the death penalty. And based on where you live and your gender will also affect your likelihood of receiving the death penalty. As a matter of fact, we even have studies that show that the more stereotypically African features that you have, or black features that you have, it will influence how likely you are to receive the death penalty. So for the same type of behavior, a black male who looks less stereotypically black, has lighter skin and narrower features, is less likely to receive the death penalty than a black male who has more stereotypically African features or black features. In addition to that, somebody who has darker skin or more stereotypically black features is also more likely to be wrongly convicted of a crime, so to be convicted when they were actually innocent. And then, of course, as many of us know, the higher your socioeconomic status, the less likely it is that you are going to receive a harsh penalty, and especially when that income is in connection to the death penalty. In terms of gender, what might be interesting for many of you, might be surprising for many of you, is that when I ask students who they think is more likely to receive the death penalty, a man who kills his wife or a wife who kills her husband, it is actually, even though students always assume it's men who kill their wives who are more likely to receive the death penalty, it's not true. Women who kill their husbands, even women who have been physically abused for many, many years, are much more likely to receive the death penalty. Actually, most women who are on death row for killing their husbands who physically, violently abuse them for many, many years. And eventually, during a short, intercession of peace, end up killing their husbands because they know impending violence is coming. And those women are very likely to receive the death penalty. Whereas men who kill their wives often receive fairly light sentences. You see usually somewhere between 6 and 12 years. So not only are they not likely to receive the death penalty, but oftentimes they won't even receive a life sentence. So just kind of on a little bit lighter note, talking about deviance and what is considered deviant and what is not. Today, one of, especially those of you who live in California, understanding what is deviant for our society and we're talking about being too fat for society. So this extreme thinness is becoming the expectation. Recently, in the media, not too long ago, a designer was blasted for using fat models, and this is the walk of the designer who decided to use plus-size models. And this scandal erupted, and it's a great way to show how you can be treated from a negative perspective if you are perceived as deviating from the norm. So today our hatred or intolerance of plus-size women is to such an extent that fat prejudice is very acceptable. This is the picture of the plus-size model that caused the uproar. And that apparently, according to our society, this is to such an extent a negative to be this size for a woman and a model that people walked out. They wouldn't work with this designer, and they refused to be in this show. So I just want to kind of give you that as a note to think about. Not everything that we think of as deviance we all agree with, and where our society is going doesn't necessarily even fit in with the reality of the world that we live in, right? Knowing that women do not achieve that standard of beauty, that it's less than 1% of women who have the body shape of a model, but yet the expectation is that almost all women should have that, right? Knowing that and talking about gender, it is more likely to be intersexed in terms of statistical ratios, to fall in the spectrum of intersex than it is to fall under the thin spectrum of a model body type. So there are less people in the world who fit the body type of a model than there are people who are intersexed within our society. So I want you to check your understanding. We talked about structural functional perspectives and social conflict perspectives. When we punish people for deviance, it reaffirms and legitimizes society. It makes everyone else conform, which is functional for society. So give an example of this. From a social conflict perspective, if ideologies are constructed by the elite to maintain a current social order, then open-mindedness and tolerance is a significant threat to the current power elite, controlling through hegemonic forces. So then my question to you is, how can you fight the elite, otherwise known as the man, by being open-minded and tolerant? Give an example of this. Next up, assignment 5, breaking a social norm, being a deviant.